Wonderful. And we are just at the 9:31 in Pacific time at least, so we can go ahead and get started. So officially welcome everyone to our webinar today. Like I mentioned, my name is Morgan Cheney. I'm our Director of Marketing and Partnerships, as well as our Culture Committee lead here at Blueboard. And I'm so excited to have with me Dr. Paul White. If we jump one slide forward. Wonderful. So Dr. White is the co-author of the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, as well as renowned psychologist and leadership trainer. So we're so excited to have him with us today. If we jump to the next slide, I'll share a quick overview of my team at Blueboard and why we care about this topic so much today. As a lot of you know, appreciation and recognition generally in the workplace is a huge driver of workplace engagement, and it really comes down to making recognition and appreciation generally very personalized and meaningful to the employee. So what that means is understanding how they like to be appreciated, understanding how they like to be recognized, seen, and valued, and the rewards that are going to be most relevant to them as well. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Blueboard, we're a recognition platform that helps companies reward their top talent with their choice of a meaningful experience. And when we say experience, that ranges from local activities like going to a glass blowing class, learning to skydive or surf, all the way up to bucket list travel. So maybe taking your family out to Banff to explore, maybe going to swim with whale sharks in Mexico, for example, things that are going to create lasting memories and also socialize whenever they come back to the office and get to share all their adventures with their team. So recognition that's very personalized and meaningful to the employee at the end of the day. If you're interested in learning more about Blueboard, we'll have a poll at the end and would love to connect you with our team. And then going forward once more, a quick bit more about Dr. Paul White and why we're so excited to have him here. Not only, like I mentioned, is he a wonderful author and will actually be giving out 5 copies of Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace today. The way that you can participate is by asking us questions and sharing along over the Q&A and chat functions. We'll be able to have your email associated through that, and we'll be notifying you if you're active on Q&A and chat. We would love to share a book with you, so please stay engaged along the way, ask us questions, and we'll hopefully get to those as we get to the end of our program. Dr. White co-authored The Language of Appreciation in the Workplace with Dr. Gary Chapman, who you're probably familiar with as well, the author of the 5 Love Languages. So it's all about bringing those languages to the workplace and making sure, again, that recognition is personal and meaningful for those that you're seeing and valuing. He's also been interviewed by a few famous publications as well, and is also a leadership trainer. So welcome again, Dr. White.
Thank you.
So let's jump into our agenda today. We'll first start with the sad state of employee appreciation. Unfortunately, not many employees always feel seen and valued, and we'll talk about what that means for your business. Dr. White will take us through an overview of the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace, and also how you can then from there assess your own individual recognition preferences, those of your team, and ultimately take action. We've also been so thankful to receive so many wonderful questions from the audience as you were RSVPing for the event. So we have a few of those questions already selected. And like I mentioned, we'd love to also take live Q&A as we can with the time left through the chat function, as well as the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom tool. So as we get started, 2 quick questions. First, Dr. White, what is your language of appreciation, just to get us started?
Mine is Words of Affirmation. So if people value what I do, I love to hear about it, you know, either orally or in writing. So that's encouraging to me.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I'm actually going to ask the audience as well if you know what your primary language of appreciation is. So you'll see a poll on screen running. I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and answer that. And if you don't know yet, that's fine. That's why we're all here. You can answer that as well. For me, I am an acts of service person. I love, especially if my friends or family or coworkers are noticing that I might need a little bit of help around the workplace. Maybe they offer to take care of something for me or lend a hand or lend me advice. That means a lot to me. So yeah, acts of service is my primary language. And looking at the screen here, it looks like Words of Affirmation is reigning high at 37%, followed by acts of service and quality time. So I'll go ahead and end the poll quickly and share those results with everyone. So here we are with Words of Affirmation at the top.
All right, that's pretty normal.
Pretty normal. All right. So let's go ahead and jump forward. Dr. White, I'll take it over to you. And thanks again for being with us today.
Sure. So I always feel like when doing webinars, there's sort of some common questions, so I'll handle that right up front. If you'd like to get a handout version of the PowerPoint slides, we'll be willing to send that to you, as well as we're going to talk about our online assessment, Motivating by Appreciation Inventory, and if you want to get a registration code to be able to take that for free, we'll send that as well. And obviously, if you make a comment or ask a question, you'll enter to win one of 5 copies of the book. So we'll be sending that out. I want to start out by just sort of clarifying that when we talk about appreciation, it's different than employee recognition. The two overlap at times, because you can appreciate something that somebody does. But as we'll see here, as it's implemented, sort of traditional employee recognition is very different than sort of a more personal, authentic appreciation. And unfortunately, this is an example. This guy says, every time you do something right, I'll punch your rewards card. And when you reach 10,000 punches, you earn a high five. So in a lot of places, unfortunately, it's sort of like you have to do a lot of little things to get not much. And we want to help companies and organizations move beyond that. Another unfortunate part about sort of recognition traditionally is that most recognition programs don't work in making individual employees feel appreciated. They weren't designed to do that. And so when we try to use that form and format to sort of affirm individuals, it often leads to actually sort of the 3 most common responses are either apathy, they don't really care because it doesn't matter to them, a little bit of sarcasm, and then sometimes it's a little bit deeper with really some cynicism, like, this is not for real at all. And so that's not where we want to go. But I need to, just affirm that, 90% of all the companies and organizations in the US have some form of employee recognition. And it can be as small as, sending an automatic email on your birthday to, quite thorough and deep experiences like Blueboard provides. But the problem is, as those have ramped up, employee engagement and job satisfaction haven't really increased, and they've decreased over the past 10 years. So something's not working right. There's a disconnect there, and we're going to talk about that. Now you may say, well, that doesn't really apply to, my organization. We do a pretty good job. Well, the fact is that a survey of a number of companies found that about 51% of managers believe they do a pretty good job of recognizing employees for work well done. I like this statistic because it feels realistic to me. It's not 95% of the managers say, hey, I'm doing a great job. About half say, I'm doing okay. The problem is when we then ask the people who work for them, only 17% of the employees who work for those managers believe the manager is doing a decent job. And so again, we've got a disconnect. And it's important because, that's only less than 1 out of 5 employees believe their manager is doing a decent job on that. And so we've got to figure that out. It'd be helpful because there's some negative things and results that happen when people don't feel valued. So the question becomes, okay, we have this employee recognition format and program. Why don't people feel valued? Well, first of all, the most common response we get, and I've been doing this for over 10 years and speak all over the place and training, is they just say, I don't hear much positive. In fact, I had a friend who's a CPA, and he said, I need to get your book. And I said, what's up? And he said, well, as long as I'm doing my job, get things done, turned in, it's okay, but I don't hear anything. He said, the silence is deafening. He said, if I make a mistake or I'm a little bit late, boom, they're right on me. And so I just don't hear anything. And it turned out he left that position within 3 months after we talked, and you'll see that's common as well. So hopefully, you're not like this, or you don't hear from somebody like this, where she says, if I walk past your desk without stopping to criticize your work, that counts as a compliment. And unfortunately, some people lead that way. It's like, if you don't hear from me, keep going, you're doing a good job. The problem is when there's silence, rarely do we insert a positive thought or inference. We don't, ask for maybe a raise or promotion. We don't hear anything and say, man, we're not thinking, boy, I bet you they're trying to figure out how to give me more money than I asked for. It doesn't go that way. So we usually fill in the negative when we don't hear anything. So you don't hear much positive. And then secondly, lots of times the messages that are sent really aren't that meaningful. Um, Group emails are fine. It's a good start, and you may say, hey team, way to go. We met our goals for the quarter and keep it up. That's fine at one level, but it really doesn't get to the personal level of what an individual did to help make that happen. So that's different than say, Josie, thanks for, staying late last night, getting all the data in. So our report was done and in on time. And that made sure that, our results were accurate. That's different than the blast group email. And also, we have, 75,000 people on our newsletter list that we send out articles to. And occasionally we do polls, and we found out that one of the main things people don't like to hear is good job, because it's too vague, it's too general. And so we'll teach you how to, a nice little format to be able to give effective praise. Also, people don't feel valued because they often feel the sole focus is on their performance and not about them as a person. Now, obviously, we want people to do the right thing, and that's actually what recognition programs were initially designed for, is to reward the behaviors and results we want to see. But, I believe everybody out there, we're people, we're a person. We're not just producers, we're not just work units. And I've had numerous people say, I only hear something good if I, exceed the standards. And, part of the problem with that is that most employee recognition programs that are based on high-level performance only touch the top 10 to 15% of an organization. You've got a big middle group, 40 to 50%, that are good people, they're working hard. If they don't reach that recognition level, they don't hear anything. And so they just feel like, yeah, I'm not worth much. And so we want to get beyond that. And to be honest, part of our approach is that we believe that people have intrinsic value, that it's not solely about performance. And then lastly, because of the way things are structured, lots of times they just don't feel people are sincere. It's sort of like, an organization that says, okay, they want a high five, we'll let them get one as long as they pay for it. And obviously that doesn't get it done. And so unfortunately, a lot of places sort of try to just mechanize everything, and then it feels pretty disingenuous. And let me just summarize. We do half-day and full-day trainings on all this, but people say, okay, Paul, net it out. What's the main difference between recognition and appreciation? The main difference is that recognition really is about performance. And that we're recognizing standards met and exceeded and set up goals, and that's fine, and that's good, as long as it's designed and implemented well and consistently. But we believe appreciation is also about the person, that we can appreciate some things that don't directly relate to performance. For example, I like to work with cheerful people more than grumpy people. Does it show up on their production report? Probably not. But I can say, hey, Jennifer, man, I just really love to hear you laugh. It just and your smile lights up the room. It's fun to be around and work with you. That's about her as a person. Or it doesn't even have to be work related. You can talk about, David, I just think it's cool that you're training for a half marathon and have the discipline to do that with all the other things going on. And so, I just think that's cool. Again, it's not about work, but it's about them as a person. Might ask, well, why does it matter? What's the big deal? And I can tell you, I'm a psychologist, and so it's not about just making people feel good. That's not the goal. If it does, that's fine. But our research, in our book, sold 400,000 copies. We sell 1,000 a week online. Found that it's practical because we cited, over 50 research studies done by Bain, the Boston Consulting Group, Gallup, that show that there are practical business benefits when people feel valued. And one of them is this, is that most managers, one study showed 89% think employees leave for more money. And we actually know that's not true. There's actually 5 decades of research that show that's not true. But only 12% of employees say that they leave for money. Now, money might be a part of it, but that's not usually what makes them leave, because leaving a job is a very emotionally demanding process. You have to disengage from your work. You have to, figure out where you're going to go and what you're doing. And so it takes an emotional driver to do that. And so it's that one research study found that 79% of the people who quit their jobs voluntarily, they're leaving on their own, say that one of the main reasons that they leave is because they don't feel valued and appreciated. And that's important to note. So almost 4 out of 10, right? I'm sorry, 4 out of 5, which if is important to understand that if you have key team players that you don't want to lose, or even your solid middle group, you better make sure that they feel valued and appreciated. Otherwise, they're looking or they're on the trading block. So one of the things I had to get over as a psychologist is that applying the 5 languages to work, it's not that difficult intellectually, but it's pretty understandable. And one of the core principles is that not everybody feels appreciated in the same ways. Now, almost everybody intellectually assents to that, but if I followed you or somebody else around and watched how they showed appreciation to their teammates, most people would use pretty much the same 1 or 2, maybe occasionally 3 actions for everybody. So we actually treat everybody that they feel appreciated in virtually the same way. And often we start with our own actions and languages. And the problem is that's not going to hit a lot of our colleagues. So the 5 languages of appreciation are based on the 5 love languages, which Dr. Chapman wrote. So they're the same in name: words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and yes, even physical touch, and we'll talk about that briefly. But they look differently in the work setting, obviously, than in personal relationships. So let me just give you a brief overview about each. The words of affirmation, 2 key parts. 1, they're words, and they're affirming. We're affirming the value of a person, what we appreciate and value about them. And it can be done in a variety of ways. I mean, it can be just done one-on-one, chatting. And I want to make sure you understand that when we talk about communicating appreciation at work, it's not just a top-down organizational kind of process. One of the things we learned, I mean, initially we started focusing on managers and supervisors, but pretty quickly we learned that people both want to give appreciation to colleagues and peers, as well as hear from colleagues and peers. So it's not necessarily from the manager to their direct report. It can be upstream. It can be parallel as well. But the most common is just individual. Now, for an introvert, sitting down and having that kind of chat can be pretty intense. So one of the things we talk about and explore is doing it in writing, and that can be a text, an email. It gives you sort of the time to sort of gather your thoughts and send it when you're ready to, and you don't have to deal with their immediate response in a face-to-face setting. So that's pretty common. In the old days, a handwritten note was viewed as the highest form of thanks. And we know that there's actually changes in that across generations, that younger employees, especially younger guys, 20-something guys, tend to not value a handwritten note that much. What's more important for younger employees is the speed in which you get back to them. So that you get back to them today or tomorrow. After that, you're sort of moving into history a little bit. So it's more about getting back to them quickly rather than taking time to write a note. For some people, it still is valuable, but not as many as in the past. And one of the things
I wanted to ask you really quickly, are you familiar with Doug Conant, who was the CEO at Campbell's Soup for many years? Yeah, I love that story. He is famous for writing, I believe, like up to 50 notes a month or something he had written to employees when he was the CEO there, and it was very instrumental. They measured in improving their performance and just general culture at Campbell's, which is such a more established company with so many employees everywhere. But I loved that even as a CEO, he made time to write personal notes from his desk based on the upward feedback that was coming from management about their own employees, so that he could really see and value them and be more closely connected to the individual contributors as well as managers at the company. So I love sharing that story too.
And a key part of that, as well as I have a friend who uses our materials, who was the CIO for Heinz company. And one holiday, she wrote thank you notes to everybody in her department. Part of the key is to be personal. If you just say, glad you're part of the team, way to go, and it's, it's generic, it really doesn't matter that much. For some people a little bit, but really you need to try to individualize it. Now, in some recognition programs, there's the structure of going in front of a large group. This is just a picture of a small team, but in our research, we found that only well, as many as around 40% of the general workforce don't want to go up in front of a large group to be shown a recognition. In fact, I had one leader tell me, she said, you know, I got an employee of the year. I had this award ceremony. I spent the 15 to 20 minutes throwing up in the bathroom prior to getting the award because some people are just, you know, don't want the focus. They're afraid they're going to trip. They're going to have to say something. And so we really encourage to not focus solely, and sometimes even to make sure recipients are okay with going up front. And there's a lot of different alternatives that we talk about letting people know through the internet of the company and so forth. Now, we've had over 200,000 people take our online assessment, and 46% of people prefer words of affirmation. So that's a big chunk. It's less than 50%. So if you just use words, you're missing over half of the employees. But you know, it's a good solid way to start. And real quickly, just a nice little format for tips. One is when you give praise, use people's names. They like to hear, we like to hear a name. If you're writing it, please spell their name correctly. Otherwise, that doesn't feel real personal. Secondly, be specific about what you value. So don't just say, you know, doing a great job. You know, try to be, and the more specific you can be, the more authentic and genuine it's going to feel to them. And third, an important part that we found that a lot of people leave out is tell them why it's important. So you might say, you know, Stephen, thanks for getting here early before the event, making sure things were good to go. And that way I could stay with our guest, who's speaker, and not have to worry about if things were getting set up. And so it can either be important to you, important to the organization, or important to the client and customer. So use their name, be specific, and link up and help them understand why it was important what they did. Quality time is the second language, and quality time is an interesting one in that there's some real differences about how people you know, desire time. For some people, it's focused attention. They want to be able to interact directly with another team member or their supervisor and manager and be able to get clarification on a project or be able to give some input. And so it's real important to be able to, you know, have that eye contact, and it's right there. But let me just say this, that more and more employees don't necessarily want individual time with their supervisor. That I've had people say, you know, my supervisor's pretty intense. I'm a little bit shy. You know, it makes me uncomfortable. And the kind of time that they want is time with their peers or colleagues. And that can be, you know, hanging out after work, going to lunch together, chatting, you know, doing something in the evenings or the weekends, or just being able to work together on a project. So it's important to understand that it's not always individual time with the manager. In fact, when we first started our inventory, we just identified people's primary language of appreciation. Pretty quickly, we got feedback and said, well, what am I supposed to do? And so we then, you know, revised it and incorporated specific actions and from whom you want those actions within your primary language, because you may want to hang out with your friends and watch some sports, but you're not going to invite your supervisor. So we let people individualize that. And, you know, a key part is shared experiences. And this is a large part of what Blueboard does and does well, whether that's team experiences. That's actually me with one of my team members doing whitewater rafting. And that was a memorable experience and sort of bonding kind of thing. It could be going sailing, you know, getting lessons in a certain skill. And it can either be team-based or it can be that it's a gift to be able to use with your family or friends. And so for some people, that kind of show of appreciation is deeply meaningful, more than words. I mean, you know, you hear the saying, you know, words are cheap. Don't tell me you care, show me. And so for a number of people, and we found that 26% of the workforce, time is the more important language to them. So about 1 out of every 4. Tips for time, it's not always about you. So just because somebody has the language of time, don't assume they want time with you, and look specifically at their action items. Secondly, you know, it's more about hanging out with colleagues, and that's true. We've done research with across generations and looked at millennials last year and had research published on that Clearly, peer relationships and time with peers is more important than sort of the supervisor-manager relationship for a lot of them. Acts of service is the third language, and acts of service is not rescuing a poor performing employee or colleague. It's really about just small acts that you can help do to help make their day go better. And I think the easiest context is to think about when you're working on a time-limited project that you're pushing to get done for the deadline, and you know, working hard, working late. What's something somebody can do to help make that go better for you? And it could be as small as, hey, I've got something in my car that needs to come in. Would you mind just bringing that in when you come in back from lunch? Or it might be, you know, you're working on a group project and you're sort of stuck. And if somebody that's worked on that type of project or maybe has a little more experience can give you some insight and listen to your questions and your challenges and help you sort of get over that obstacle, that can be really meaningful to a lot of people. 22% of the workforce choose acts of service, so about 1 out of every 5. And I can tell you, for a lot of acts of service people, words aren't meaningful to them. And so, I mean, I had a graphic designer tell me, she said, you know, my language is acts of service. I was working on a project. My colleagues left at the end of the day and, you know, said, way to go, keep going, hope it gets done well. If you get done, come join us at the sports bar. Torqued her off. I mean, she had steam coming out of her ears because she was like, you know, don't just talk to me about it, you know, help out some way. And so it varies a lot in different settings what an act of service looks like, but here's some ways. I mean, one is to, you know, just keep interruptions from happening, you know, that you sort of handle any questions or calls that are coming through so they can keep focused, bring in lunch so they can continue to work on tasks, maybe cover other tasks, short-term kinds of things that, you know, they've got sort of daily things they do. You can cover that so they can stay focused on the project, and make sure your team has the resources to do their jobs efficiently. One of the most common requests that happen in the general workplace is to help get my computer to work right. And so you may not be the IT person, but you can maybe facilitate to make sure that the printer is connected right, or whatever kinds of interactions or a resource they have that make it go better can work for them. So tangible gifts. Tangible gifts are not raises, bonuses, typically not big kinds of things, because again, we're focusing not only on managers and supervisors, you can include that, but we're also looking at peers, but it's largely just small things that show you're getting to know your colleagues and what they like. Remember, we're talking about getting to know people as persons. And so part of that is chatting, finding out about their weekend, what they did, what, you know, this last week I worked with a team. Some of the team, you know, liked coffee and had very specific desires. And there were some teamers that didn't like coffee at all. They drank tea. Some people were just water. You know, it seems like a little thing, but if you offer coffee to somebody that doesn't drink coffee at all, it's like, no, and especially if that's repetitive. So, you know, one of the things just to think about is, you know, what's the most common gift in the workplace? And it's actually food. I mean, that is bringing in maybe somebody's favorite coffee in the morning, especially when they have, you know, seasonal specials. Could be, you know, bagels, pizza, donuts, you know, and a way to individualize that is to identify what types different team members like and make sure that you get those and let them know. In our office, it's about chocolate, you know, and we have fun with chocolate, and some are milk chocolate, dark chocolate. I say chocolate's the food of the gods and you can't miss much there. So, and it can be, you know, ordering in lunch as well as a manager or supervisor for the team to just say, hey, thanks team, you know, you're going well. And you can talk about the individual contributions over the past week to help you, that made you, you know, achieve your goals. And then also it's less about things really, and it's more about experiences. And obviously Blueboard focuses on this, and they do a nice job of individualizing things that can either be done as a team, can be done with colleagues, or with family and friends. And Morgan, do you have anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, really just we believe in experiences because they have the ability to be so memorable and to drive socialization in the workplace. It's really also this notion of empowering employee well-being and thinking about, we're in this time now of no longer work-life separation, no longer work-life balance, but really towards work-life integration. So how can you, as their employer, really offer benefits that let them live their best life, try something new, challenge their comfort zones, reconnect with friends and family outside of the workplace. So we do that through this menu of experiences that they get to choose from. So again, that personal element and not forcing their manager to know them so well that they might be able to pick the perfect experience for them, but really giving them their choice from 30 to 50 at any point in our menu. Whether that's doing something adventurous like you see on screen of swimming with dolphins, or just reconnecting with someone's daughters, for example, on Father's Day over a really exciting meal. So it's their preference, and then we bring it to life through a concierge service, but it's really all about something that's meaningful to them, that's going to help them feel more appreciated and help build that culture of appreciation that's so important as well, to show that leadership truly sees and values the community and believes in supporting the team's great work.
Cool, good, good. Yeah, and a key part is that it's personalized. I can tell you that one of the fun things in my job is I get to hear about the negative stories, and sometimes they're sad, but if a person values gifts, one of the ways to really offend them is to give everybody the same gift, because it basically shows you didn't really think about it, and you sort of did it. Also, I've had a number of people that work for organizations that they only got corporate logo kinds of stuff, and they just felt like a walking billboard, and so you have to be careful about that. So one of the things about tangible gifts in the sense of appreciation is that it's only about 6% of the workforce say that this is the main way I want to receive appreciation. And so for those organizations that focus solely on sort of words and rewards, they only touch about 50 to 51% of the workforce. Now, tangible gifts can be quite meaningful when they're paired with something else, with time, with acts of service. And so they actually help those become more powerful, but just in and of themselves, and especially if it's just an impersonal generic gift, you're really sort of throwing your money away. Physical touch, everybody's always interested in talking about. And obviously it's a difficult subject in the workplace as well as other relationships. But let me just say that Dr. Chapman and I looked at, do we even keep this in the model for the workplace? And we decided yes, for two reasons. One is we did not want to advocate a touchless society even in the workplace, because appropriate physical touch in the right relationship, right context can be quite meaningful, and as you'll see, sometimes fun. Secondly, it happens, right? And it happens appropriately. Now we are, when I talk to HR managers or some leaders, they're like, we tease about having paramedics in the room because they're like, oh, we're going to get sued. So no touch anywhere, anytime. And we're talking about appropriate physical touch. We're not talking about sort of the weird, hug guy that's roaming around. So, but what a physical touch is in the workplace, it's largely spontaneous celebration, right? It's when something goes right, you have a high five, maybe a fist bump, a congratulatory handshake for a finished project or big sale, and even a pat on the back. And our resources, our books is in 18 languages, our inventories in 7 or 8, Spanish and Chinese, French, and so forth. And our materials are used internationally, and we found that cross-culturally, a pat on the back is the most accepted form of sort of physical show of appreciation. And it varies regionally within the US, right? I lived in Atlanta for a while, and they do sort of the side hug kind of thing. Southern California, there's sort of the bro hug that you hear about and for greeting. And in New York and New Jersey, if anybody's up there, this is what physical touch looks like there. Hey, and that's it. You just sort of do the nod of the head and say hey from across the room. So obviously the recipient is always the person who gets to define what's appropriate. Now you say, okay, people are showing appreciation in different ways. How do you know what? Well, some people say, well, can you ask them? Well, in our culture, that really doesn't work too well, because it's sort of a weird conversation. So like, if I want to show you appreciation, how should I do it? First, it just feels sort of weird. Secondly, you're mainly going to get, I don't know, tell me thanks. And that's about it. You're not going to get much breadth or depth of information. Secondly, some people say, well, how about, you sort of observe what they do and all that kind of thing. First of all, you don't have any data points. I mean, how many times you get to observe individuals communicating appreciation? So it's hard to make that. Secondly, we've done some research and found that about 75% of the time people do use the language that's important to them, but 25% of the time they don't, especially for gift givers. People that like to give gifts don't always like to receive gifts. So that doesn't really work. So we created an objective assessment that's included with our book. You can also buy the codes separately. It's called the Motivating by Appreciation Inventory, called the MBA Inventory for short. And it's it takes 10 or 15 minutes online, and it creates an individual report for each person. And we have two versions, sort of a basic, just right to the point version, and then an expanded version that also identifies how they don't want to be shown appreciation. But it identifies their primary language, what language is most important to them, their secondary language, because those two used together can be quite impactful. And like I mentioned, just knowing the language in a work-based relationship isn't as helpful as knowing the specific action. So after we identify your primary language, we go back and let you choose from 20 to 25 specific actions and from whom you want those. And then another important piece is your least valued language. It's the one that's just not that important to you. You don't think about it that much. The problem is that sort of becomes your blind spot in relating to others, because you're going to have team members and colleagues that that have that language. And if you're not sort of become cognizant of that and develop a plan, it's going to be you're going to leave them out essentially. We've created a lot of really free resources online on our website. It's appreciationatwork.com, including like a group profile that you can plot out both here the languages of each team member. We also have an action item list and other kinds of visual symbols and so forth. Here's the positive aspect. I mean, lots of research, and again, this is all demonstrated in our book. And so both the citations I gave earlier, as well as these results are found in the 5 languages of appreciation. But when people feel valued, it improves their relationships, both between supervisors and employees and coworkers. It increases people's sense of satisfaction. I mean, that it's natural for us to want to feel valued, and that what we're doing is meaningful. And when we hear that or experience that with others, that makes us feel better. It decreases staff turnover, which is huge right now, almost more than other times, because it's so hard to find good people. And so, again, thinking about that one statistic, that 79% of people leave voluntarily when they don't feel valued. If you have key team members that you don't want to lose, you better make sure they feel valued and appreciated. One of the most practical ones that I think really is there is that it diminishes internal tension and conflict. When people don't feel valued, they're more chippy, they're more irritable, and it's usually over stupid little things. I mean, it's like what size their monitor is, where their desk is facing, they have access to a window, issues around parking spaces or whatever. And it's stupid little things that take up time and emotional energy that all can flow away and allow you to focus your time and energy on really the mission of your organization. And actually, we have good research that shows that when people feel valued, their productivity goes up. What's interesting is one study showed productivity goes up 18% for teams, comparing teams that feel valued versus not, but profitability goes up 22%. So what's interesting is that there's actually more value than just productivity, because it decreases that turnover, and it allows people to stay focused on what they're doing and stay on the right task. And the other thing that we know is that when team members feel valued, their customers feel more satisfied about their experience. And so that's a secondary aspect as well. And we actually have research that shows that managers and supervisors enjoy their work more when their team feels valued. So there's benefit for you, because you don't have to deal with all these other issues. So again, just some resources, and we're going to go to questions and comments. If you want a handout version of the slides or a registration code to take the MBA inventory, just email me there at yesdrpaul@gmail.com. Put Blueboard webinar in the subject line, because I'm doing some different webinars. I want to make sure that I get you the right information. now you have some time to add to any questions you want to throw in there and enter into the raffle for the 5 copies. And we'll go there. So Morgan, let me hand it off to you.
Sounds great. So yeah, like I mentioned at the beginning, we had a great number, I believe over 50 different questions that came through from our RSVPs. And we picked some of the ones out just to get started with that were really central to the majority of the themes that people were sharing. So if we jump to the next slide really quickly. The first question was really all around scale. You know, that's ultimately why we're here today. And there's been a few questions even that came in from the live Q&A. Specifically, let's see, JC mentioned a question similar to this about adapting to an enterprise program and similar. But the idea here is, how do you really think about taking these very personal languages and ultimately scaling that across the company? Mm-hmm. So Dr. White, I'll start with you. What's your best practice for that?
Well, we've had success in doing so. I mean, we've taken our appreciation and work resources and training across Miller Coors nationally, across DirecTV. We're working with Caterpillar, John Deere. We've worked with some large banks and accounting firms. And the way it works, though, is that it's not a top-down kind of thing. And I actually argue against sort of a company-wide implementation because that undermines the perceived authenticity right away if everybody has to do it. And so what we do is we find people that are interested. I'll come in and I'll do a training session, a presentation, maybe a keynote at a big meeting to give sort of everybody the overview in the same language, and then let them identify that, hey, I'd like to do this with my team. And so we've then either for me to do ongoing training, but we've created an online train-the-trainer course that people can use, a turnkey training kit, and do it sort of team by team and let it go sort of organically that way. And that it works well. Does it happen all at once? No. Does it happen well? Yes, because we're really both sort of showing people and also learning along the way, because part of our model is to customize what we do with the culture of that company. And so it's finding people who are interested, starting that, and then it grows from there.
Yeah, and just to add to that, a big thing that we believe in at Blueboard is this notion of socialization and building awareness. So as those programs roll out as well, what are the best practices that someone can use to create more awareness and show that recognition programs are in place? There's some interesting stats that I believe that came from Gallup, but it's like 1 in 10 employees don't actually feel like they're valued. And then really 90% of companies are having recognition, or it might actually be 75% each, but sorry, it's around the notion of like most employees don't feel valued, but actually companies do have programs in place. So the disconnect is that managers might not know what the resources are available to them. They might not feel comfortable using those resources because they haven't really been trained on how to properly recognize. But ultimately, awareness is really key to scale. If you are able to demonstrate and show off the people who are being recognized, maybe that's through announcing, if it's spot recognition, people who've been recognized at a town hall meeting, maybe through company newsletters, even maybe paper that kind of announcement bulletins that are posted through your office, potentially showing winners off on digital TVs in your lobby, whatever that might be. Ultimately, the channels that you're already actively utilizing for communication, how do you surface the stories from those that are appreciated so that others can not only model their behavior and continue to strive for better work, but also see that recognition is happening, even if they themselves have not yet been part of those programs.
Yeah, and I would just add, Morgan, that one of the things we found about a culture change, being help, workplaces change their culture, is that it's a combination of structure plus spontaneity. And that, if you make communicating appreciation or reporting about it as part of your, whether it's weekly, monthly, whatever team meeting, that's really important versus just, your financials or productivity. And so it needs to have both parts.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Let's jump to the next question. So this one came in from Bree. She was asking, any suggestions for keeping remote or distributed teams top in mind? And this has been a pretty active topic on the Q&A as well. People have been asking about distributed workers or non-desk workers, for example, who might not have the technology capabilities to stay in touch, or they might not really leave their manufacturing environment. So what are some ideas for scaling appreciation that you found when more and more of our workforce is now distributed or fully remote?
Yeah, actually, we published a research study that we did last year on comparing remote employees and how they want to be shown appreciation versus, face-to-face employees. And largely, what's interesting is that their preferences are the same, although quality time, and words is still number one, but quality time bounces up a little bit. And then we followed up and did some deeper analysis and interviewing about that, and found out that one thing is that communicating with people through video conferencing, at least occasionally, is really desired for people that are working by a distance versus just emails and phone and so forth. And so it doesn't have to happen all the time. I have a remote team member that when we have a team meeting, we at least start out with video and check in and so forth. And then depending on what's going on, we might get out of that. But the other part is that one of the challenges with remote employees is that a lot of appreciation, person-to-person appreciation, happens somewhat spontaneously or informally. You may walk by somebody's office and check in with them. You might see them on coming in from the parking lot or the street or down at the break room. And those kinds of spontaneous interactions don't happen hardly at all remotely. And so one of the things we found is that if you're going to connect with a long distance employee, it's really important to sort of structure that personal kind of communication, because if you don't, the communication really shrinks to just being about tasks and work. And so you say, hey, let's get on a little bit early before the call, or you set up a separate call and you find out what they did over the weekend, or you talk about, the sporting event that just happened, or, how they're doing. And if you don't sort of structure that, it's not likely to happen. And then that's when remote employees really feel left out. And in fact, our inventory, it was actually the first variation. We've created different variations of the inventory. One is for long distance workers, because, the question is, how do you show, spend quality time or do an act of service when they're in another city, state, country? And so we've identified the action items are specific for that, for the long distance kind of relationship. So we have that for those kinds of settings and work relationships.
Yeah, I'll share too, just on the quality time element. In our office, just for everyone's background, we have about 70 employees now at Blueboard, but we're across 3 different offices, 2 in California, 1 in Europe, and then we also have about 6 employees that are fully remote, working from home offices. And one tool that we've adopted in the last year that's been really powerful for building those connections and finding opportunities for people to appreciate each other is a Slack integration called Donut, and they have a tool called Connections that pairs you up with people on Slack you don't often have direct messages with. So the idea is it's someone that you wouldn't normally bump into. You have the opportunity to pair with them and have what's called a donut date at your own cadence. Some people do every 3 weeks for a new match. We do 1 month at Blueboard. But it's given me the opportunity and a lot of those on my team to interact with our teammates in Europe or maybe in San Diego that I don't often see. I get to spend some time with them, even if it's just 30 minutes. We have a moderated question that's kind of an icebreaker that people work with, and you get to hear about the projects that they're excited about in their own department. And it's been a really cool way and lightweight way to, again, build those connections and foster quality time across offices.
Cool.
Wonderful. All right, moving along to our next question. How do you respond to employees who say they would rather have cash than any item or experience? And this comes from Christiane, who's with Kellermeyer Bergensons. I wanted to start with this one. This is absolutely a question we get regularly at Blueboard, and it's tricky because there's things to think about from a psychology perspective, and the main psychological study, if you will, is around the notion of psychic value. Psychic value means, in the case of a cash or gift card item, that the monetary value is very clearly written out. It's sometimes even printed physically, right, on a paper bill if it's $20, $100, or on a gift card. that has immediate psychic value, which does make sense to the employee. So that's why they sometimes will say that they prefer it, because they know immediately what it is. However, the challenge with that is that it is very transactional, and they might not feel that the monetary value that you've given them reflects the amount of work that they've put in. And I'd say that's even more important for knowledge workers who might even know what their billable hour rate is and things like that, and they can kind of reverse the math on you. So some people, yes, they feel like they want cash, but at the end of the day, what is the long-term impact that cash has on your business, and ultimately the measurements and the metrics that you care about? So when you think about long-term engagement, when you think about building connections, when you think about behavior change and motivation, that's often linked to more of the recognition programs versus appreciation. We find that experiences or other ways to recognize people in a personal way have a much longer life cycle, meaning that you have these amazing elements that take place, anticipation before their experience takes place, as they're planning their event, they're getting excited, they're talking and socializing about it with friends and coworkers. They have the activity itself, and then they have afterglow, which is the whole notion of all of the memories that you store that you continue to hold on to even many, many years later, that you can associate back with your company. So while again, employees might think they want cash, at the end of the day, experiences will have a greater impact on the employee's outcome, as well as have just a longer lasting impact on them through afterglow specifically. But it's always a great thing to raise with your employees and try out. So if you're curious about experiences, like I mentioned, we're always happy to connect, and I'll run a poll shortly for those who are interested to learn more from our team. Anything you want to add to that as well, Dr. White?
Yeah, I would say from our perspective, especially focusing a lot on collegial appreciation, that cash, it doesn't come up a lot. It's sort of, it can create a weirdness of, here, I appreciate you, here's $20. But the point is that it does make a difference. It's, let's say somebody, you know, one of their favorite musicians or shows coming up that they'd really like to go to, and they're in a setting where they really can't afford to do it. Sometimes, you know, team members will, you know, contribute to either purchasing a ticket or you know, part of it, and can be quite meaningful that way. Yeah. And also I was thinking about the prior question about, asked somewhat about manufacturing and people that don't have access to technology. We've actually used our resources and model with, currently I'm working with a mining company, and we have a number of construction companies, as well as manufacturing, and it can work. Sometimes it's done because the inventory takes maybe 15 minutes to take, they can do it at a team meeting or whatever. Or we actually had one setting where, you know, just people couldn't be off the line at all. And so because it takes 15 minutes, they would either, for a week or so, they could either come in a little bit early to work, do it over lunch or after lunch. And they were willing to do that because they knew that it was about how, for their supervisor and others didn't know how to show them appreciation and encouragement. So that's there on that. Okay.
Yeah, we can jump into the next question. All right, so this one comes from Sierra with Method. She asked, how do you reach someone who refuses to let go of the "we're so busy to stop" excuse for not paying attention to each other? So this is really, we're all kind of in a little bit of a rat race now, especially with the stresses of the workplace becoming inside and outside of the office with technology and being connected to our phones and work constantly. So there's a general busyness, I would say, in the air for most people right now. But it's not an excuse necessarily to not stop and show appreciation. What are some best practices you have for that, Dr. White?
Well, actually, busyness is the #1 reason people cite why they think appreciation isn't communicated more, and regardless of your level of position or industry. And so I wrote a follow-up book to the 5 languages of appreciation. It's called The Vibrant Workplace, and it's subtitled, you know, Overcoming Obstacles to Creating a Culture of Appreciation. Identified 10 of the top obstacles you have to address, and busyness is one of them. And so part of it is, I mean, as a psychologist that I'm, you know, supposed to specialize in behavior change, both for individuals and groups, I had to think about this. And so we've actually developed our process and materials to incorporate this issue. And I can tell people our process does not create another to-do list for you. You got two, at least, you know, your regular one, sort of your projects, and then you don't need an appreciation or recognition to-do list. What we found is that we can help people do what they're already doing or almost doing and improve that and specify it. One of the things we don't want is we don't want leaders or anyone writing an email to everybody, going by and spending time with everybody, helping out. That's not what they want. We want to help you identify what each person, not only their language, but the specific actions and in relationship to your role, whether you're a colleague or a direct report, so that it's sort of like, hitting the target versus doing a shotgun approach. And that then reduces and makes you more efficient, reduces the time and effort required to communicate appreciation. And then the downside or downflow from that is that all those sort of negative things about people not showing up, not calling in, showing up late, not following instructions, conflict, those, sort of decrease over time, and it builds more time for you. So it actually increases your ability to focus on the work. So we'll understand it, we address it, and I think that's why our resources continue to grow across the country and even the world.
100%. Dr. White, I'm going to have you go forward to the slide with the PDC certification, but we will still cover a few questions. For anyone who is collecting their SHRM or renewing their SHRM credentials, the PDC code is 19QP3DH, and that's on screen. Again, it's 19QP3DH. We have time for one more question, so I'm going to go through. There's actually one that came through from two ladies on the chat. They were really wondering, how do we show appreciation from a corporate level when we're not interacting with employees on a daily basis? So this is a little bit of a newer one, Dr. White. It kind of speaks to scale, and specifically, are there best practices that companies can adopt through their leadership to show a general blanket of appreciation for the company versus the one-to-one that I know is going to be really linked to the outcomes of the MBA inventory?
Yeah, I think there's two answers to it. One is that you need to focus on your daily work relationships, your team members, because if you aren't doing that, anything else that you do organizationally or programmatically is not going to look good when you're down the road. Your team members don't think it really fits you. So you got to and that's also the sort of the power is this can start anywhere with anyone. You don't have to be in a leadership position. You can be in a mid-level management position, supervisor, frontline worker, and show appreciation to the people around you. The second one, though, is to really access and argue for the resources to help implement a program of appreciation, which is different than recognition. And in fact, the most successful organizations have both. They have a performance-based recognition program, but then they also say, hey, we need to fill in the gaps for those people that aren't the highest level, and that we want to support and show appreciation to them. So I would focus less on trying to communicate it from the top level, to 3 or more levels down, because it needs to be personal, unless you hear something or can make it personal that way. But what you can do is help support the process of your HR group getting trained in how to show appreciation, how to train teams so that they can do it amongst one another. So it's both modeling it and then also providing the resources and focus to help drive it throughout the organization. And when we've been successful, and we've improved people's, Gallup scores, there's a question number 7 that talks about, recognition, appreciation, that a lot of companies can't get that one to move. We've been able to substantively move that when we work together to figure out how to apply this to their organization.
Yeah, it seems like it should be more of a groundswell coming from almost the bottom or through the sides. Maybe it's like everybody should be knowing how to appreciate each other and making that something that's comfortable and not competitive to give. Yep. And then while the leadership team is supporting that through resources to make sure that comes to life. Great.
Absolutely.
We have time for one more question. This one was pre-submitted, and it came from Barbara, who's with the Department of Economic Security in Arizona. Really, this one's all about buy-in, and we've had a few questions similarly to Barbara's of, great, I took the assessment, what do I do now? How's the best way to get managers and senior leadership to take advantage of this program? So anything that you can recommend, Dr. White, really to get running once you maybe take the assessment, or once you start to observe or ask, teammates what their primary language is, things like that.
Yeah, so, I deal with reality. And the reality is that not everybody's interested in this, and we don't try to make everybody interested. Sometimes, in fact, when I deal with groups, we have people that just say, hey, we pay them, that's our appreciation, have a nice day. And that's fine. And all I ask for people that aren't interested is just step to the side. You don't have to, don't fake it. That doesn't help anybody. And, just if you can not be obstructive. And so we just ask and I had a number of HR people and others say, my manager's not interested. And I just say, just ask them if they would mind if you started this with your group, see how it goes. We've got a pre-post assessment. We can actually measure the benefit over time and start there. So, facts often don't change people's minds, but if you want facts, in chapter 2 of the 5 languages, 50 plus research citations of all different kinds of things that it reduces, on-site accidents in manufacturing. It reduces employee theft, all those kinds of things. You can get them the facts. That may or may not change their mind. More likely is, see if you can do a pilot study with your group. Have somebody, we have, 800 facilitators across the world that have gone through a training that can come in and do training, or you can do it yourself. Just start there, start small, and don't beat your head against the wall if that's not where they're coming from.
Yeah, it seems like at the end of the day, if you're passionate about this topic, you can roll it out with your team and maybe get some big wins in and start to roll it through your department and then maybe ultimately through the company. But don't feel blocked by needing to get buy-in. It might be something you can just run with on your own independently and get some good learnings from.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, we are finished up now. Dr. White, thank you again so much for being our guest and joining us today. Just for future webinars, our next one with Blueboard is going to be on August 24th, and it's going to be in partnership with our friends at Culture Amp. We'll be having more news on that soon. And the topic will be how to recognize and celebrate your top performers. So a few of you actually wrote in about spot recognition. We'll be covering that and having a wonderful guest speaker from our client at Mimecast as well. So stay tuned for more details for that. I also left a note about if you want the slides or the link to the inventory to take that for yourself, you can email Dr. White with yes, Dr. Paul@gmail.com. Just put Blueboard webinar in the subject line so he makes sure to send you the right materials. But with that, we'll go ahead and close down. Thank you again, Dr. White, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. See you next time.